Greetings everybody. I would like to start this video off by thanking each and every one of you for helping me push through 100 subscribers, and now I'm working my way towards 1,000 subscribers. In the following few days, I will be posting some information on my Facebook page, containing some information on my page which involves my subscribers. So feel free to click the link below that takes you to my Facebook page to stay updated on the upcoming events of July. That being said, let's dive on in. I graduated from high school today, and as I look over my happy memories and stupid moments, I can't help but remember that awful afternoon. It's like a stain on my mind that comes up whenever I try to remember anything about my high school memories. I hope that by writing it down here, I can come to terms with what had happened. The teacher's voice had subsided into the background as I stared at my workbook. Our math teacher wasn't that good. In fact, I'm surprised as to why they had signed him to our class, which was an Extension 1. It wasn't worth thinking about this though, because the bell was going to ring any second now. When it did ring, everyone started to pack up their things and file out of the classroom. I stayed behind for a minute and waited for my friend to pack up and then followed him. Both of us knew where we were going, down to the usual soccer courts to play our typical lunch game of soccer, if that's what you would call it. In reality, it was more of a mixture of aggressive shoving, tackling, and largely offensive language. This being an obvious result to what happens when teenage boys are left with minimal teacher supervision. I hope it doesn't rain, Ethan, my friend, said as we walked past the canteen. It's been raining all week, dude. It better not happen now. We were finally there, and we plopped our bags down in a little shed where the rest of them were and walked into the fence off the soccer courts. Most of the kids were already there, a mix of older and younger grades all eager to kick a ball and shove someone. The teams formed naturally, and before we knew it, we were all running at each other. The ball eluded some and landing at the feet of others, only to be launched back and forth between the goals with only a few of the actually skilled kids trying to dribble and pass. Even when the ball finally made its way close to one of the goals, there were so many kids on the court that it would be almost impossible to shoot without hitting someone. To be honest, I wasn't much of a soccer player. I would usually just run back and forth on the field, trying to get a go at the ball. Sometimes I'd get it, sometimes I'd push someone with the ball and take it from them, only to pass it to the opposite team. Most of the time, I'd be occasionally staring at the large trees that surrounded the soccer court, leaving only one side to spare. Today, the weather was dodgy. It was cold and windy, and those big, almost black trees were swaying. The clouds up in the sky were dark, gray, and heavy. Despite it being barely past 1 in the afternoon, the level of light made it feel closer to the evening. Regardless of this, we were playing more passionately than ever before. Many of the regular players had decided not to come today as they had a test the next period, and some preferred to stay warm in the library. In the end, it had boiled down to about 20 of us, eager to play after a week of no play due to the rains. Our teams were much smaller and tight-knit, and the game was intense. 10 minutes in, the game was beginning to reach its peak. Goals had been scored on both ends, and we were all warmed up and aggressive. It was an unspoken sentiment amongst all of us that winning this game would be the ultimate trophy for the rest of this term. The circumstance and weather had turned into a very chill game of lunchtime soccer into one that was even more stressful than the Premier League finals. It began to rain, a light drizzle that started to darken our white dress shirts in little spots. Everyone ignored it, knowing that the game must go on. Then the rain began to fall harder, and the sheets of water like buckets began flipping upon us. All of us were drenched, our shirts clinging to our bodies and our gray trousers weighing us down. Then, in the intensity of the rain, the ball was rocketed towards one of our defenders. He kicked it hard, but at just the wrong angle, and the ball went flying up into the air, over the high chain-link fence and down somewhere into the trees. Almost immediately, everyone started yelling and complaining. The kid who had kicked the ball hung his face in shame and ran off to get it. We all stood around waiting and chattering amongst each other. The sudden pause in play had made us really realize how wet we were and how intense the game had gotten. Some suggested calling it for the day and going into shelter due to the rain, but most of us wanted to finish this. It had now been a few minutes since the kid had disappeared in between the dark trees. We were starting to get impatient. The rain relentlessly poured down on us. Drops of water were pouring off of everyone now. Our clothes, already too drenched to absorb any more water. The court was also getting worse with the puddles forming here and there. One of the kids started yelling out for him to come back. "Leon, where the hell are you?" No response from the trees. Just a steady drum of rain and a sway of branches in a wind. The kid that had initially called out began to walk towards the trees with a tinge of irritation in his step. Then, just before he was about to walk out of the courts, Leon appeared again. He looked horrible. His shirt was torn in various places and stained in patches of dirt. His hands were covered in small cuts and his hair looked like he'd been in a tornado. The most jarring was his lack of response, though. The way he solemnly walked with a ball in his hands, it seemed deflated. Everyone was walking over to him now with deep concern rising through all of us. People asked him if he was okay, how he had gotten into that sort of condition, but Leon refused to answer any of them. He let the ball drop to the floor before he himself collapsed. The atmosphere of the principal's office was tight. The silence, a weighing burden on all of us that became more and more unbearable the longer it stretched on for. Usually, we'd just be yelled at for playing soccer in the rain and getting ourselves wet, but today it was different. Today we were being accused of doing something to Leon. Leon, who is now being sent to the hospital to be treated. Fortunately, though, we all had our stories straight. The principal was quick to realize that something had happened amongst those trees, and as soon as he realized that, she let us off. It was just like that. A whole serious investigation was closed immediately, and we were free to leave to our next classes with the warning that we don't speak of what happened to the others. It was inevitable that the rumors would spread, and when they did, I learned a lot more about those trees. Apparently, several students had come back out in similar horrible conditions after they had walked into those trees. There was this group of girls that had decided to spend a lunchtime there between the trees one lunch. They were late to their classes by a full half hour, and when they came, they were supposedly in much worse condition than Leon. Another young boy was found sometime after school by a janitor, just lying outside the trees looking like he'd been through hell. There was this other boy from our grade who had once lost his frisbee there, and as he was about to walk in to get it, he saw something there and jumped back. When his friends questioned him as to why he didn't want to go to retrieve the frisbee, he would not describe what he saw. At this point, and it's hard to separate the fake stories from the facts, but it was obvious that something was up with those trees. For a long time, many of us avoided playing soccer down at the courts. Even on warm sunny days, when the birds were chirping and the sky was full of clouds, the trees remained dark and uninviting, almost daring us to traverse them. The natural avoidance and caution around the trees reduced the number of incidents almost to none. A month would pass, and winter would reach its peak. Cold, freezing winds now regularly blew across the school, and most of us either huddled in groups around various parts of the school to exchange conversations or hug out in the library, only to be kicked out for being nosy. Winter also meant the approach of the exams, and so the topic of the trees was almost off our minds. It was much like a ghostly afterimage now, a chapter in our lives that had ended. That is, until the first death happened. It was a teacher walking down past the trees after school that got to see the body, impaled on a thick tree branch, and as pale as the snow surrounding it. Beneath it, a bright red pool of blood staining the snow like a food dye in water. Police were sent to investigate, and we were let out of school for a week. The incident was largely covered up to save the school's fallen reputation, but that didn't stop the whispers in the hallways. And then one morning, as we all piled into school, we saw heavy machinery and construction crew near the trees. The school had decided that the best way to deal with the trees would be cut them down. At this point, no one really gave supernatural attributes to the trees, but we all assumed some group of students was using them to do sadistic things. But never once did we blame the very trees and the forest. When the bell for the first period rang, we all walked to our classrooms. Only this time, the irritating buzz of the machinery permeated the classroom and made it hard to focus. The teacher was talking about something when, right in between her lecture, the sky outside began to darken as the sound of the machinery died down. Everyone rushed to the windows before the teacher could ask us to sit down, and we all got an eyeful. Luckily, our classroom was positioned in good view of those trees, so we got to see exactly what was happening. The darkness was leaking from the trees where the blades of the machines had cut them. It was like an oil spill in the ocean, spreading into the sky and turning it an inky black darker than the night sky. Within a few moments, the sun began to drown in this vicious darkness, and that's when it went completely pitch black. People were starting to panic in the blindness with the school lockdown alarms ringing. Instructions to stay in the classrooms and remain calm blared across the speakers. I turned back from the window and pulled my phone out of my pocket to turn its flashlight on. Many others did the same, lighting up the room in ghastly white glows. Our faces were pale and overshadowed by panic. Then, when we looked back at the windows, some of the students were still staring out. "I see something," one of them said, and then all of them in unison. Then they began to scream, all on the same note in a chorus from hell as they turned back from the windows and jumped on top of the closest kid they could find. They clawed at their throats with bare hands, attacking them in utter madness. No lockdown instructions were going to keep the remaining of us inside the classroom, with people literally murdering each other. We all ran into the hallways and were greeted by more kids running around as well. A crowd of bodies was beginning to form, pushing and shoving me around helplessly wherever the collective body was going. I saw a few kids fall and never get up again, and nearly fell a couple times myself as people shoved me from all directions. Shockwaves of shoving and pushing went around the crowd as everyone screamed and tried to run out of the building. And getting down the stairs was the worst, and I'm surprised I managed to stay on my feet as people shoved me from the top. The sky was beginning to lighten up again as the darkness seemed to dissipate into the sky. And then, just like it had started, the darkness faded away slowly. The police had already arrived at the scene, plus some men in black suits. Our school was quarantined for a week, but this time we were given serious NDAs to sign and paid off big sums to keep us silent. If you were to walk around our school today, it's unavoidable that you'd notice a group of trees down by our soccer courts. They are now white.